This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friend with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hey labial love bugs, welcome back. Today we're going to be learning about how fascia affects every aspect of our life and health, and how using movement and some nifty little techniques to work with the fascia can enhance our pelvic floor health, our pleasure, and our sex lives. And I've got a very knowledgeable and bubbly guest to discuss all of this action with too. Her name is Anna. Oh my God, I always do this. I wanted to ask how to pronounce
Anna Rahe.
Okay.
That's
Rahe?
okay. And don't take it out. Don't take it out. I love authentic. It's so confusing. Anna Rahe.
Right.
There you go.
I can't even tell you how many times that's happened, and I leave it in. Because it is not spelt that way. That's not intuitive.
No, it's a horrible
R-A-H-E.
Yeah. It's not
Come on,
at
bitch.
all. In fact, it's really funny. I have spent many years being like, should I just go in and change my name to R-A-Y? It'd be a lot more easy for people to follow me or find me. It's like Anna Rahe. That's it.
Fully. Okay, cool. Great. Glad we clarified that. So
Yeah.
for the past 25 years, Anna has delved deep into a liberating and empowering relationship with fascia so that as many people as possible can invest in their health, restore their vitality, and connect with their bodies. As the founder, CEO, and educator of GTS Body, Anna has spoken about holistic body care through fascia around the world, partnered with top athletes, surgeons, physicians, and celebrities, and has been featured in various publications from Shape to Elle, Net-a-Porter to the Wall Street Journal. Hot damn. Welcome, Anna. Pull up a clit cushion. Get comfy.
Hello. I love this. Thanks for having me. This is really fun. I'm excited. Already.
Okay, so I guess to kind of frame what we're going to be chatting about and why it's all relevant, the conversation around improving sexual experience often entails things, and I fully back these things and I talk about them a lot, but it's often, communication or sort of how to keep the spark alive, or how to sort of cultivate and foster deeper emotional connection and emotional tenderness. And this is all great. There are a lot of studies around how communication is the most important factor in improving sexual satisfaction. So this is all crucial, but there's a whole kind of physical realm that sometimes gets overlooked when it comes to stretching, strengthening muscles, movement to kind of keep it all supple and juicy, keep flow happening in terms of blood flow, lymph flow, energy flow.
Yeah,
And this all
lubrication.
plays like a really, yeah, exactly. So that
Mhm.
plays like a very key role in sex and pleasure and access to orgasm. And so since I've got you here, I was gonna, yeah, I guess get your take on how we can use some like simple fascia based exercises to improve our sexual functioning and our sexual experiences, and to help us feel kind of better in our bodies and more embodied, more able to access sensation and I guess sort of like movement, flow, flexibility. So
Yeah.
I suppose first off though, we should probably chat about fascia and just give
What
everyone
is it?
like
Yeah.
a foundational
That's what I was going
understanding
to
of
ask you.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Do your listeners know what
Um,
fascia is? Because I talk about it like it's like a, an everyday occurrence, and everyone's like, "What is that? I've never heard of it. I don't know what you're talking about." And so maybe we could start. Yeah, that's a good place to
totally,
start. What
totally.
is
Yeah, yeah,
fascia?
yeah. What is fascia?
Okay.
Why is it so vital, for your
Yeah.
well-being? Like, why do we need to know about it and why is it important?
Very cool. Okay, so fascia, for the person who has no knowledge, is literally a type of body tissue that is all out throughout your body, and it's kind of akin to being like cotton in your shirts, right? It's a fabric that's made from collagen and elastin. If you were to kind of de-skin your body and look inside, it looks like a gel gooey web of like spider webs, like micro spider webs everywhere, and it covers every single thing in your body. And the fascia has many significant like services and functions, but it becomes its greatest picture. I know that I like to expand it for people. I'm always like, yes, we can narrow it down to what is fascia to a tissue, but actually fascia is a whole body system. It comes complete with
Mm.
its own organs, just like your vascular system has a heart and veins and capillaries and arteries. Your digestive system has a pancreas and a gallbladder. And so the fascia organizes an entire body system called your connective tissue system. And this system organizes your body and actually organizes around every other system. So it is a major influencer of your cardiovascular health. It influences your endocrine system. It is constantly modulating your reproductive system, your bladder, your pelvic floor, which is what we'll get to in a little bit. And so in its greatest capacity, for this conversation, it's a sensory organ. It's a huge sensory organ. It has 7 times as many sensoreceptors as any other tissue previously thought to be muscles. Fascia has now been discovered in recent research that it has 7 times as many receptors in it. What is a receptor? This is what we'll kind of dive into with sensual pleasure and, how things work. But a receptor is just this like little node, little cell in your tissues that like registers chemicals. What kind of chemicals? You can have light receptors. You can have chemoreceptors. You can have neuroreceptors, which is like toxic receptors. And you have what's called mechanoreceptors. Pressure. They like sense different types of stimulation. And this is literally how we collect our experiences through our lives in our sexual encounters is through the fascia, not through the muscles. And so all of a sudden, the way that we're relating to the world, the way that we're perceiving the world, the way that we collect our experiences through the sensations that we have that are computed to our brains into an interesting area of the brain called the insula. Okay, and the insula has been shown to show where our beliefs, this comes into our mental aptitude in sex and how we connect to sensation and our associations. And so our sensations get sent to this area of the brain, the insula, where we form our associations, our conscious identification of things. It's not just, oh, I can feel this over here. It's this is how I feel about that feeling. This is how that feeling is affecting me. And so fascia gives this huge total body consciousness as a sensory organ. It kind of creates your body consciousness the way your brain creates your mind consciousness. And together, they are constantly computing and learning how to mechanically and chemically alter and the word is metabolize our experiences into forming our sense of self. And so when it comes to just physical mechanoreceptors, yes, it's involved in the strength of our pelvic floor, how our uterus is sat above the vaginal wall. And it's also the positioning of our vital organs inside and the pressurization. A lot of times people don't talk about the pressurization of their pelvic floor. The body's thoracic cavity holds a very, very intentional pressurization, which is also what determines the accessibility of pleasure points, not just its like general structure, but how it's placed in the nervous system field and where that happens. So fascia does all of that. It's the organizer of your internal space. It's the hydrator. It's what gives you lubrication for your joints as well as for your vagina. It is the hydration system that is constantly being able to feed your body movement and sensory experiences. And so it becomes, I don't know, like this interesting organ that how did we not know this? Why did we not know this before? And it also opens up this totally different channel to being embodied, right? To being healthy in a completely different framework. It's not just diet and exercise. It's actually, here's a connective system that connects everything. And it's going to influence your kind of, I guess I'd say, total body health and wellness, you know? I was teasing you on the front side of our interview. I love how Australians say body. And I want to say it like body. So if I ever just go out and talk about fascia in the body, that's what I want to say. It's one of my favorite words. Okay. Anyway, so that's a general, this is why it's important, is that when your fascia is unhealthy, and we can talk about what that means, it literally limits your ability to feel things, to move, to breathe, to you have like noise that goes through your sensors. It's one of the deepest registers of body pain. So if you have trauma, sexual trauma, and experience pain during sex, fascia is the thing that's actually reporting nociceptors or telling your body, this isn't good. I don't like this. And so how do you work with opening your tissues to be able to calm those sensors and say, actually, wait a second. And it is a brain body thing. Fascia is deeply wired into the brain body connection of being human.
Yeah. Whoa.
So,
it's so like when I learned about fascia, I was like, what the fuck? Like, you know, it's kind of insane. It's kind of insane. And something that kind of helped me wrap my head around it and visualize it was this example, whoever it was, teacher maybe, gave, where they were like, you know, when you separate orange segments and each segment has kind of like a membranous sort of film over it and it encapsulates it. Or, you know, when you're cutting up chicken and there's that white sort of very thin, fine, cobwebby membrane that you have to kind of peel off, and it's like, that's fascia. And so then if you imagine in your own body, every single muscle fiber, everything is coated in like its own little encapsulated sort of fascial coating, and then that's touching and joining on to like other bits of fascia. So it's pretty much this like completely interconnected web within the body. So if your fascia is affected in one way or tugged or pulled, or maybe there's scar tissue that's sort of bunching up and adhering to sections of it in one part of the body, it may then throw it out of balance and tug it in another area. Yeah, it's kind of important to understand when you're doing body work and things like that. And in terms of like, you know, in my yoga teacher training, they talked about that a lot in terms of like movement and flow and stretching and kind of keeping it all supple. So I'm like nerding out so hard as I'm listening to you talk about all of this.
It is, it's kind of exciting, especially for people who love bodies, because it's like, for me, it started as a journey of like just wanting to get over the pain and restriction in my body and having these like really severe, I was 18 and felt like I was in a body that was 80. And it was like, I was a yoga teacher. I was a Pilates teacher. I had studied gyrotonics. I had studied Bartani and Laban. I had like hit every single Tai Chi, Qi Gong, like I was a dry needler. I had studied acupuncture.
Wow.
And I still couldn't get. And so I was like, this can't be muscles. This can't be And so when you start realizing that it is connected, all my digestive symptoms were fascia, and all of my headaches and depression were fascia, and all of my muscular soreness and my inability to stretch. I was a dancer. I stretched every day and never got more flexible. And I would run one day like I was a marathon runner all the way through Golden Gate Park. And the next day I was breathing like I was a 10-pack-a-day smoker. Like it was the craziest, most, and so I had to go in and be like, what system could possibly be this diverse, this weird, and it just became like a fun mystery. It's like you geek out because you're like, all of a sudden it adds options to you, the person who's looking like, I've tried everything therapy, or I've tried every blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but wait, there's this new land. There's this new land that has new fruit and new like ideas and new, concepts that can be implemented into our understanding. And it changes the field. It changes the game for us in terms of like, and I would actually argue in my experience is that fascia not only is just something to consider, it's actually, if you understand how fascia works and what it needs to be healthy, you are inversely peaking your performance of every other body system. Because the cardiovascular system relies so heavily on the fascia and the connective tissue system state, the state of the fibers, the state of the hydration, the state of its movement for its function, that if you have unhealthy fascia, every other system is compromised, which is what is exciting because you can walk into a body and be like, all of our medical system is like diagnosis based, which is like, close the aperture. It's like, oh, we've determined that this is what's wrong with you. And here's the medicine. And fascia goes, wait a second, open the aperture, see that your left shoulder pain and your right, pain during, sexual intercourse is the same. And like, to your point, it's so interconnected that most of the time we're like, if I change my position, it's fine. And I'm like, but what if you could change your tissue? What if you could remodel that area? And fascia is highly adaptive. And so it remodels almost, I think, 70% of the fascia, intramuscular fascia, remodels every 7 months, 6 months, something like that. So it's a very pretty high turnover. It's not your liver that does it in 30 days, but it's a high turnover cellular experience because it's so vital. It's so important to all your body systems that it has to be maintained. And that's what brings it to the forefront of health and wellness in general, is like, this body system we didn't know existed that's covering everything, instead of it being superfluous, like it was treated for the last 200 years in dissection and in medical, it's like, this is actually probably pretty significant. It's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So it's kind of exciting. I can understand why you geek out.
So,
because I want to geek out with you.
Totally. What causes unhealthy fascia, or what makes your fascia unhappy and starts creating issues then?
Such a good question. So I think there's a lot of things, right? Like with almost every topic of disease, it's like lifestyle versus genetics is pretty much the conversation there. And my favorite thing to talk about is, lifestyle, because it's the, lowest hanging fruit. It's easy to change these things. But there's also I was just reading an article and research on, autoimmune disease and fascia, and it's significantly impacted. And also those diseases, fascial connective tissue disease is also a thing. But to the listener, most people don't have those. God bless them. It's lifestyle. And so around the age of 15, there's a natural oxidative process that comes into our bodies called glycation. And glycation is a process of how we metabolize sugars into our tissues that create a kind of stickiness, a kind of rigidity that enters into the system. This same process starts to happen without movement. And it's kind of like, for the listener, it kind of is a process like when you put your honey in the cupboard for a few months without stirring it, and you'll get these like crystals. Well, if it sits there pretty long and longer, pretty soon the whole jar is crystals and not honey, right? But if you actually take the honey out and stir it, the crystals will mix back in. And this is what movement does for fascia. Fascia needs a very specific amount of movement, a type of movement, a nutritional, likening movement to a nutritional parallel. It needs certain nutrients in order to be actively used correctly and to keep glycation from setting in. When glycation starts, fibers get sticky and then they don't glide and they don't hydrate. And when two soft things rub together, like if you get calluses. So it's kind of like the inside surface of fascia is kind of like the internal skin. And if you go out on a fall day with your rake and you're like, I'm going to rake up these leaves, and you rake for 3 hours, by the end of the day, you have these little like rough spots on your palm. And if you did it again and again and again, you would keep having calluses on your hand. And this is what tends to happen with the like glycation response, is that it becomes immobile and the tissue gets dehydrated, and then it becomes more and more sticky and unable to pass mechanical load through it. When mechanical load is restricted, think about like a netting on a trampoline, that if all of a sudden your net started to get harder and harder and more rigid, there's less cushion and there's less movement, and then it pulls from other areas, kind of like what you were talking about. And if you do that with enough aggression or enough passivity, right, glycation can happen, and we could talk about this. Fascia is a really good spiritual teacher of moderation. It's like not too much, not too little, right down the middle. Not too little movement, high hit, really high cardio, all of this really intense working out for hours at a time is really bad for it. It's like, here's what I like. I like big ranges of motion, and I like doing it microdose throughout my day. Like we don't think about sitting down and eating a 3,000 calorie meal each day to meet our caloric requirement. And that's what we do with our movement. We're like, sit all day, glycation, and then we go out and we try to stretch and run our fascia, and we literally scorch it through excessive load. And then that ends up creating problems. The other thing is that stress will do the same thing. So fascia responds to the chemical loads of our mind the way it responds to our physical loads in our bodies. Your body produces what I call a chemical cocktail of experience. 2 shots of adrenaline, 3 shots of cortisol, 1 of vermouth, and it shakes it up and it sends it through your fascia and is like, here, this is first love, or this is the, divorce, or this is the fascia contracts in a protective way to metabolize these influences of stress. And then it's supposed to eliminate through the body through movement. But none of us actually put our energy, our feelings into emotion, which just in Greek means energy in motion. And so all of a sudden, our physical motion and our emotion is like being loaded in and stressing our tissues. And you've heard this probably in all your, trainings of the issues are in the tissues. And I think it's very accurate that we do not exfoliate and move enough. And movement is not exercise and fitness. That is not the type of movement I'm talking about. Fascia wants this like super lush, hydrating, joy-filled, spiraling, spinning, like super dynamic. And we hold poses and we tighten and tone and we try to like lock in our fat and we try to like make stone out of our tissues. And it's like, you wouldn't blow your nose in a piece of stone. You want it to be soft and supple like a Kleenex. And I say that because the body needs, like fascia has to be hydrated. A way for a simple way for your listener to understand unhealthy fascia is like dry ramen noodles. It's brittle, it breaks, it's all enmeshed together, it's rigid, and it won't give. But you add hydration, water, hot water to it, and that's like motion. Motion is lotion for the body and for the fascia. And you start letting the noodles first separate, and they can spread their fibers to allow the chemicals to move through, allow for the load to be passed between its fibers. And then there's that third step of not just loosening them, but pulling them apart and allowing them to have freedom and agility in between them. And that process is literally really only achieved by movement, not just by rolling. Rolling can hydrate the tissues. It can actually bring more, it's kind of like a way we squeeze a sponge and the water comes out and then we let the sponge go. Fascia, just by rolling, gets the smush and the pull and the smush and the pull. But movement actually takes those noodles and starts to string them and open them. And when fibers are fluid and moving, the sensory experience in your body changes drastically. All of a sudden, it's not muted. Like think about like trying to listen inside of like that dry ramen noodles. It's like the sensors are viced. And when they're open, then all of a sudden you can hear and you can feel and you can sense. And so I like to tell people in some of the spiritual podcasts that we talk about, like body consciousness versus mind consciousness, is that the more you open your fascia, you are literally expanding your consciousness because you are actually opening up the fibers and can take in more real sensation, real information from your life. And that is by definition what expanding consciousness is. How much can I see? How great is my perspective? And that all comes down to proprioception, which is controlled by the fascia. That was a long explanation.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. There's so much in there. I'm like trying to remember everything I wanted to like address. But yeah, I love that you mentioned proprioception is a fascial function, and you know, the nonlinear movement. Like I teach a lot of that, and I've got an online course for women around like sex and having better pleasure and orgasms and things. And there's some solid stuff in there around that juicy nonlinear movement that you're talking about. That isn't just, you know, the like bicep curls or the static yoga poses or whatever. Yeah. And, you know,
probably most of the people who listen to your podcast aren't that people anyway, but that's the majority of people who listen to what I have to say because I'm a movement-based person. And so it's like changing their minds. But most people who are wanting this work are feelers, right? They're desperate to have feelings. They want to go inside. They want to, I tell people all the time, I hate working out. I am not a fitness influencer. I'm like a feeler. I want to be in my body, and fascia just is fun. So yeah, you're right. It's like it's a different, I love that you're teaching nonlinear movement. In fact, it should probably be like, I like the word nonlinear, but then I'm also like, what about spiraling or like, so one of the things that I talk about is the difference between nonlinear movement is pretty much based upon solid mechanics. Have you ever heard of solid mechanics? And do you remember that from physics? Did you ever get that far? I didn't take physics in high school either.
Me neither.
This all came later when I was trying to figure out what was happening to me. Anyway, there's two branches of physics that study the different material that we exist in. One is called solid mechanics, and it studies like levers and pulleys and, you know, and then there's fluid dynamics. And fluid dynamics studies the science of water. And it just turns out that fascia is 70% water, 30% fiber. It means that when you move, you are more like water balloons being hurled through the air than you are sticks. And when you think about it like that, all of a sudden it's like we're totally moving wrong. Our arms are actually big hydraulic pumps. They're not a lever and a stick. And so that's like, okay, we need to actually be splattering inside. We need to be like juicy movement that's like providing this deep source of hydration. And so part of the work that I do is really redefining biomechanics for fascia rather than applying. A lot of people like to apply solid mechanics to fascial mechanics because they are really still focused on the fiber side. And it's like fluid. Fluid is actually what's causing, it's called a fluid shift. And that's what causes cellular reprogramming in fascia, is how the water moves next to the fiber and moves the cell. It's the water that moves and provides the impetus for cellular restructuring. So fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a different worldview.
Yeah. And I love, you could totally call like this body of work juicy movement. I loved it when you said that. That's such a good little soundbite. But yeah, so important. And that's why I love dance. You know, it's my primary kind of way of moving, I would say. Because one, it's fun and it doesn't feel like exercise, but it still is. Yeah. And what you were saying about like, you know, sort of lubricating everything and trying to get it all juicy and fluid rather than brittle reminded me a lot of like my training with yoni mapping around the psoas muscle, because there's a similar kind of thing that goes on with it becoming kind of brittle, and you want to keep it really nice and lubricated. And there's particular sorts of motion and movement that assist that, and there's other things that make it want to contract and then cause it to be, you know. And I was actually, just a total side note, I was really curious as you're talking. I'm like, what do you think of underwire bras, like really tight underwire bras that kind of strap us in? Like, is that affecting the fascia by having that sort of constriction in the
Yeah.
same spot every day? Because when I give people massage, I'm noticing some really fibrous kind of stiffness underneath their breasts,
Yes.
particularly larger women who probably have to have more support and
That's
are
right.
probably really strapping them in. Like, am I imagining that? Like, what do you think of this? Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be, hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
So, I mean, it's true. Fascia adapts based upon load. And when you tight and vice your tissue with anything and then it rubs, fascia is remodeling as you move, as you breathe, So that's one thing. That's a tissue thing. And you're not imagining that. That's very, very true. That fascia is adapting to its points of friction and load.
Mm-hmm.
I, funny enough, hardly ever wear underwire bras. And today I needed one because the back of my shirt had to be, okay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally like super uncomfortable. I remember why I don't wear those anymore. The reason I say that is that because there's one other issue is that where the bra circles the body is what's called the adrenal belt, or what I call the adrenal belt. It's right where your adrenal glands sit with the kidneys, right at the top of the diaphragm. It's the center, the measurable center of your body. And it's a very important area of the body for our stress responses. Number one, it's our primary adrenal glands produce the primary stress hormones to get you up and save your life if you are back in the jungles. But it also creates toxicity in your tissues when you live stress, psychological loading, right? When you can't get rid of it. It shuts down the diaphragm and it actually stresses the mechanical load, stresses the adrenals. Okay. And when those adrenal glands are pushed mechanically in a certain physiological like tightness, it produces more stress hormones. And those stress hormones then flow down into what's called the flow field of your low back. It also uses your psoas because there's this whole pattern of flow that comes through the low back to distribute those stress chemicals. When they sit in the adrenal belt and when they sit in the low back tension over and over and over again, they actually create a huge amount of inflammation, which leads to glycation, lack of flow, lack of opening. And so that's the other thing. It's not just the friction of it. It's actually how we chemically load. And that can be induced by a physical thing, right? The physical tightness of restriction locks your diaphragm and starts that, what I'm talking about is the endocrine response to the mechanical stimulation. And so most people should do tons more arching, especially if you wear, underwire bras. I like to wear them sometimes. I want to push up every once in a while. I've had 3 children. I don't think that it's wrong to want to have some perk in my boobs. But I think that, and this is the thing, not too much, not too little. Like if you can get away with wearing the most loose bra possible, but still have support. And I'm not a big breasted woman. So I'm sure some people would be like, you have no idea what it's like. And I'm like, I know. But I do think that if that is your condition, if that's a thing that is in your life, then find ways to balance it, right? Like every night before you go to bed, I would spend some time opening my diaphragm and releasing the tension underneath my bra line. It's really important for your health because mechanical tightness will secrete cortisol into your system, even when the bra is gone, if you can imagine. And just as a side note, it's not just bra wearers, okay? If you do your core the way we're taught to hold rigid and connect your hips in dance, they teach you this. It's in yoga. It's everywhere. Pilates, all of my disciplines. Make your core solid. Take your hips and your ribs and connect them tightly through the contraction of your abdominal wall. This is the exact same tension that we get from slouching, from wearing tight bras. You're vicing the most central, like important nucleus of all of your physiology. And it leads to massive problems in your tissues, massive, both from the chemical endocrine channel and also from the mechanical side. So we can't avoid bras. We can't avoid stress. We can't avoid these things. So then it becomes the question of like, how do we get massive skills? And this is what I love about what you do and what I'm trying to do through my work is just, here's some mechanics. Here's some skills, biomechanics, skills for life. We want to teach you how to have these skills so that when this stuff comes up, when you're in the bedroom and you're terrified, or when you're completely disassociated, or when you're so stressed you can't, or when your hip is killing you because you've got, genetic stuff in your hip, here's what you do. Here's something to implement. And so it's just really practical tools that actually save you, because sometimes you got to wear the freaking bra. Sometimes you just got to, get through your stresses. So, I think that's more the message is like, don't try to eliminate those things, but find the way, go to Freya and get it. I want some body work from you, by the way. I would die to experience your body work, because as you know, as a body worker, you probably don't get as much as you really need.
Oh my God.
And as a teacher at Body, I'm like, I just want someone's hands on me to rub out my bra line. That would be really nice. Anyway, so that's really fun.
Tell me about it. Honestly, if anyone's dishing out massages, please send them my way. I am so in need. My cup is empty. As a body worker, you're just giving out so much. And so and my touch needs are already probably higher than the average person, because it's my favorite it's what soothes my nervous system the most. And massage is like a full love language for me.
Yes.
But
is that what
I'm
you
loving
do like primarily, right? Is massage primarily the focus of your work in terms of helping free women?
Sort of. I'm moving away from the massage component a little bit, doing a bit more sex coaching and education. But in any yoni massage or internal pelvic release session, there's always body work involved. And the internal pelvis massage is like probably my main modality. So I'm sort of working with all of the tissues inside the pelvis. And obviously fascia is a part of that. I do a lot of like chest and breast massage and abdominal massage, and love that you mentioned. I mean, I'm always just trying to tell people like, stop sucking your tummy in. It is so detrimental to your pleasure and your pelvic floor health and everything. Like, stop it.
Everything, your digestion, your microbiome. Stop.
It's so automatic for so many people. They've been doing it their whole lives. Like some people's mothers like taught them when they were kids to like suck their bellies in, and so it's just this habitual pattern in their body now. They don't even notice they're doing it, and their butt's tight and their tummies are tight, and I'm like, oh babe, no wonder you can't have an orgasm.
That's so interesting. Both of those things, tightening your tummy, tucking your pelvis, really, like, it's all about like, that's loading in, right? It's like putting force in the wrong things. It torques. And I just was talking to someone the other day. It was funny. It came up on a non-sex podcast, but this guy's like, I've heard that fascia, and I was like, okay, let's talk about it. Anyway, and I was saying to him that a lot of times we don't understand that the pelvic floor is has more autonomic nerve innervation than it has somatic, which means you don't always choose the tonality in your pelvic floor. It's actually hard to access muscularly. You have some, but not a lot, because the fascia in the pelvic floor takes its tensegrity, its ability to hold tension, multiple planes of tension, from its diaphragmatic mirror, its upper thoracic diaphragmatic mirror. And when you tuck your pelvis, so it's a 3-dimensional structure that actually cuts the pelvis in half, right? Or not vertically, but horizontally, matches the diaphragmatic center. It takes its tone from the integrity of your torso. And when you start holding in your tummy and tightening your ribs and tucking your pelvis, you've taken the magnetic pull that fascia works on, the interconnected barometric pressure, and turned it off. And when you do that, all of the other surrounding tissues lose their tone. That's why incontinence often follows. That's why your pleasure centers will be way off because your pelvic floor is literally over tight in some ways and under tight in others based upon the torsion of your pelvis and your diaphragm. And so if you can actually set I don't like the word set. If you can, like we're talking about, release the tensions in a balanced way between diaphragm, where that bra line is, and your pelvic floor, 90% of pelvic floor health will be restored because it's autonomically set through internal barometric pressures inside the torso, because it's responsible for holding your vital organs inside. So I feel like there's this misunderstanding that we still go in and we're like, let's fix the pelvic floor. And it's like, but the pelvic floor will fix itself. Naturally will take its it'll like come up to tone when the right tone is existing above it and around it and through it, rather than I have to go in and we kind of get obsessed with releasing. And I've been doing this 25 years, and my first journey was definitely like, just release everything, because everything felt so fucking tight. I'm like, release. But if you learn the principles of fascia and biotensegrity, it's saying that it's not that tension is bad. It's that tension has to be rightly distributed between structures. And so where there is no tone, there must be tone. But where there's too much, we need to bring it down. And when you think dimensionally, fascia is very much, it's not like a linear scale. When we think like balance, we think right side equals 5 pounds, left side, that's how we're going to fix this, right? More tone over here. It's actually very broad base. And that's what the pelvic floor is, a broad base muscle structures that have so many points of attachment that you can't just like go in and be like, oh, this aspect has to be, right? It's linear thinking versus non-linear, right? Back to your really good language on that, because it's like, we need to, I think sometimes we hyper focus on the symptom rather than going to the source. And fascia constantly reminds us to go back to source. You could need to open your heart tissue right behind the sternum, the cardiac muscles, to actually release the diaphragm, and your pelvic floor will fix. It'll just fix, because the body is this organically, like holistically connected thing. And it's a really good reminder for us who pursue holistic things that it's like, just check, are you approaching your healing, whatever that healing looks like, from like this seems to be the issue. And I remember being like that, because I'm like, my stomach is such a fucking issue. My microbiome, I have IBS. They tell me I have symptoms like IBS, but then I test fine in my colonoscopy and I don't have. And then I just fixed my fascia and the motility of my fascia. And then it was like, oh,
everything fell into place.
It fixes itself. It kind of is a nice peace of mind that you don't have to work so hard on it, is the point.
Yeah. Because, your body does want to find balance. It wants to find, its natural state of balance. And so if you give it a little helping hand in certain areas, it'll do the rest of the work for you. And I'd love to get into some actual sort of techniques around releasing the diaphragm and getting that fascia moving so that your pelvic floor can kind of have the flow on effect of that. But first, I'd love to do the segment, Get Pregnant and Die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
I pretty much just ask all of my guests to share a sex ed story. It could be like how their sex ed failed them. It might be something that you wanted to have learned more about that you didn't. Maybe something funny someone said in class when you're in school,
I said it. I got totally shamed for it. I have a story for you.
Oh my God.
I'm in 5th grade education, and they were talking about penile erections, and I didn't totally understand it. I was kind of uncomfortable. Obviously, I'm in 5th grade and we're talking about penises, even though my parents were quite open. And the teacher's like, and so it just rises. And I was like, I mean, does it rise like bread? And she got so mad at me. She's like, this is not a time to be funny, Anna. You're not being serious. And I was like, I was really kind of serious. I don't understand how a penis gets hard and rises. Anyway, so that was my bad sex education. And luckily I wasn't totally shamed by it, and because people kind of laughed. And now I understand. I have a 2-year-old son, and I'm like, I understand why you have that.
Yeah. Love that. Adore that. I mean, as soon as you said what the teacher had said about rising, like I went to rising bread as well because I used to do baking.
Oh,
As
did
like
you really?
I was in patisserie and baking. It's like my
So
first ever job. So that's where
it's
my
funny
mind
that it's
went.
like, why do you talk about a rising penis? Also, thank you. Good point. That is not a word. It's like it lifts, it sticks out. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's like rising. I'm like, what's the
Yeah,
rising? Anyway, so
yeah.
that's a funny. I love that you asked that those questions.
All right, love it. So let's chat about how fascia can contribute to enhancing sexual experiences.
Yeah,
I'd love to chat about how it can help improve strength, increase blood flow, enhance
yeah,
flexibility, articulation of the pelvic floor muscles, and how this all kind of allows us access to more sensation and therefore more pleasure.
great. So first of all, well, there's so many different aspects. Ooh.
I know.
Okay. I also talk a lot, so I'm trying to simplify this. Okay, so
Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab. And the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you're a member just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
first of all, just staying flexible gives you options of positions, right? And so let's start on the macro perspective. I think most people's hips are so tight that they can't always get into positions that create options. And a lot of the work that I really do with people is helping to create options in their bodies. They walk into me and they're like, I only do this, or I can't touch my toes, or my hip won't do this, or I'm in so much pain, I can't do this with my knees. And the same thing is with sex. It's like, this is too painful, I can't. I'm not going to, and it's like, but you're limiting all of the things that have access. And so the first thing that creates options is having many points of flexibility. And so fascia is really the regulator of the ability of the body to stretch. And so muscle stretching relies on the fascia to be able to do that. And so the first thing that I would say is to enhance your pleasure, you want to add flexibility. And the only way to do that is through fascia. Stretching fascia with very specific techniques, because not all stretching, like I told you earlier, I was a dancer and I stretched till I was blue in the face and I never got more flexible until I started working with the fascia. And then it was like, whoa, I'm a Balanchine dancer type of flexibility that was built, not born. I was not born flexible. So that's kind of an encouraging thing for people who are like, I just can't get flexible. What am I going to do to get flexible? And I can give you guys some stretches. I have some good videos on my online studio for like pelvic floor health and opening up the pelvis and hips and things like that. So then if we go into the structures of the muscle tissues, like I said, that the internal tissues take their pressures and their orientation. Fascia is a structural tissue that organizes your internal body cavities. If your diaphragm is tight and always held up and restricted in tightness, it's also pulling up on your pelvic floor. When the pelvic floor lifts up, it lifts up all of the organs that surround it, and it'll actually take you out of the range of motion. What I talk about is the pelvic floor's range of motion, where the penis penetrating you can hit. So you actually need the pelvic floor to sink down to elongate the vaginal cavity in order for there to be access to penetration at all. And so most women's diaphragms are so tight, the pelvic floor is so retracted, it's called, that even if they wanted to, the penis can't get to sensory pleasure places inside. So there's breathing techniques that you can do to train the diaphragm to be able to loosen the pelvic floor in its elevation or in its retraction so that there's more spread and more access, and it lowers and lengthens the lower body tissues. So that's another thing. So breathing techniques that can help you. Another aspect is actually how the diaphragm, think about the diaphragm. It's not 100% accurate because there's many, not diaphragm. The pelvic floor, it's not just one muscle. It has many different aspects, but it creates kind of a circular disc that cuts the pelvis vertically. Inside of that, if your disc is off on one side, think about kind of a quarter dancing on its side. If your pelvic floor is off, oftentimes from tucking and trying to squeeze your butt or trying to hold your tummy in, then you've actually tilted the diaphragmatic disc inside of you. And that will also change the orientation. And this is all fascia related because fascia is holding the structures of where it is. It means think about when you tailor a dress. Let's say that your hem is too high. If you tuck your pelvis, the front side of your pelvis is too high, and it actually has to be let out in order to be able to move back into that kind of disc center that I was talking about. So that will end up affecting sexual pleasure. Now, then you get down to the receptors that we talked about in the very beginning of class. A lot of times, pelvic floor dysfunction will actually mute sensors. So even if you have over-tightened tissue, the mechanical feeling or sensation that you're looking for to create pleasure is not available. So what we try to do is actually go in, and I think you might do this in a lot of the internal massage, is actually help people start to re-experience feeling in these areas. You're like, do you feel this? And there's places that will be vacant. I went through a big stage in my life because I have a history of sexual abuse where there was literally vacant places inside of me that would be like, what?
Yeah.
And being able to actually re-engage with these sensations helps the body to know that it is there and safe. And all of those sensations come through fascia. And so it's not above me to encourage people to actually use dildos to, do penetration for an exercise almost, rather than only going in, take away I have to have pleasure. And it's like, let me just collect options of feelings. I just want to feel something more, because the not feeling doesn't build anything. And I would use this analogy that I use with people in pain who come into me. You have this lake of, I can't orgasm, or this lake of, I'm in pain. And people come in, they're like, I have 3 lily pads. Can you get me over this big chasm lake that I can't cross over? And you're like, well, that's a long way to jump from lily pad to lily pad. Let's add some lily pads. Let's add some options. And then I can walk you through how to jump this way and that way. And so the idea is that when you're healing relationship to your pelvic floor, to vaginal sensation, to, creeping out of your skin, or whatever is your experience, sensory, the idea is to climb in and kind of take it out of the mystery and be like, I just need to feel something. Or I want to look at this painful feeling in sex, because a lot of times overly restricted pelvic floors, if they're adhered to sides of your, bladder and stuff, will cause pain in and of themselves. And so, being able to find that release by accessing different sensations is really important. And so that's what I would say is the kind of 3-prong approach, from the macro perspective of flexibility down into these more micro movements of sensory experiences. And then there comes the issue of movement in the vagina, movement in the uterus, movement of the contraction of these tissues. And a lot of times when you have a lack of tensegrity in that area, the tissues don't actually, the term that I use is called animate. And that's one of the primary things for vaginal orgasms versus clitoral orgasms, where the muscles can actually undulate and create a movement of themselves. And most people have lost fascial animation in these areas due to this high rigid tone where the muscles don't know how the tissues, it's not just muscle, to be able to animate, kind of like sea anemones do in the ocean when a wave comes. When you're penetrated, there's this thing that fascia does, that it takes the pressure and it moves it and works within its own animating system to create pleasure. And so that's another there's techniques to be able to create and restore animation. I think that's one of my biggest complaints about people healing their pelvic floor stuff through Kegels alone. I'm like, you're doing with a Kegel what you're doing with your abs, what you're doing with your diaphragm, and you're tightening everything with lack of sophistication. And if you think about how fascia reticulates, which just means it spreads out like a net rather than pulling in these, like, we always associate muscles with our limbs. A bicep shortens and it elongates, and it shortens and elongates. But every other muscle in the body and the torso is multi-attachment, rectangular, triangular sheet. And that pelvic floor is constructed very much in that way. And so, I don't know. Did that answer the question? Like that three-pronged approach of how to do it? You have to restore tissue animation. That's kind of the number one thing that I tell people is just the stretching doesn't necessarily meet all of those criteria for fascia. And you can restore that, right? And this is what I would say to people, like, it's kind of the same thing with massage, is that you can go to someone and they do it for you, but when they're lying on the bed with you, what they should be thinking is, I feel her doing this. How could I do it in my own tissue? And you're asking the physiology to participate, where it's an education process, not just a releasing, not just a opening, but it's like what you're doing intuitively to help them. The person on the table should be thinking, I need my muscle, my fascia, my tissues to actually move like that. And if my tissues move like that, then I have way more access to feeling, sensation, lubrication, because movement is what lubricates you, right? As soon as you're starting to get aroused, the body's like, oh, my tissues start to lubricate so that I can be, penetrated.
So. Yeah, and it just shits me how much focus there is on like Kegels and contraction and strengthening the pelvic floor through just this very basic like contraction. It's like squeeze and, it's very mental.
I love you. I didn't know how you were going to feel about that. I'm like, this is risky. She knows more than I do about the pelvic floor, but I'm going to put it out there.
No, totally. I think, and like a big issue that people come to see me with is chronic pelvic floor tension, like this hypertonic pelvic floor. And so much of the time they know how to fucking squeeze. They don't need to do any more Kegels. They actually need to learn how to like release and relax and soften and get the rippling going in there rather than just the like very rigid kind of movement. And just learn how to do it themselves. Cause it's like, I can, release things in massage, but ideally, like I'm always sending people home with their own sort of home play practices to continue the work themselves, because ideally they learn to do that in their own body and they teach the tissues how to do it automatically without needing any sort of conscious like work on them. So I'd love to hear like your kind of go-to tips and tricks and techniques that you give people to get the tissues animated again. And if there was ones that were more specific to like that diaphragm you're talking about, around that adrenal band or the pelvic floor, that would be amazing. But honestly, like everything affects everything in the body. So any of these techniques will, regardless of where they're targeted, will still benefit the pelvic floor and will still allow you more access to pleasure. I have no doubt. So just spray it on us.
Okay.
What you got?
It's so hard in a podcast to like, because it's a movement. And so I'm like, how do I describe this? And so I'm going to simplify this to the big things that you can do. Number one, lift your fucking rib cage. Your rib cage is constantly, chronically collapsed. And we do it in all of our disciplines. We do it in a response to stress and to sadness and to grief and to everything. You must extend your ribs and stick it out. And you're going to be like, it feels like I'm sticking my boobs out. And it's like, yeah, you need to do that a lot, because what that does is it opens up the thoracic cavity to start letting the tissues and the organs resettle in your torso. So 5 times a day, take your hands behind you, lace your fingers, lift them up as high as you can and stick your boobs out as high as you can and just stretch and stretch. Even arch your spine. Make your boobs go up to your chin, even if it creates an arch in your low back, which we'll get to in a minute. Stick out your chest like a peacock and take in 5 breaths of air, because Lifting your rib cage is like the hoop skirt. You still have to go in and give it oxygen and give the lungs. So you need to restore lung capacity so that there's suspension that stays in there. Okay. So take in 5 deep breaths and you're going to be like, I can hardly breathe. And you're like, yeah, your intercostal muscles don't move. Those are the muscles in between your ribs. So just lace your fingers behind you, lift them as high as you can, stick out your chest and breathe 17 times, trying to get your lungs to go up under your collarbones where the top of your first rib is. Secondly, keep your hands laced. And I want you to try to breathe now and pull all of your guts down into your pelvis. When you breathe, you want your diaphragm to descend, not ascend. Every time people breathe, they breathe really, really high and their diaphragm gets stuck up underneath their rib cage. And your vagus nerve innervates, which just means runs through your diaphragm. And when you do that, it actually puts you into a stress response. Okay, a sympathetic, like, I've got to get out of here response. So you take your deep breath, put your arms behind you, and then as you breathe, you try to actually drop and pull the diaphragm down. All of the tissues in the body takes their action from polarity. The upper hemisphere pulls back to front and up, and it moves in like this circular movement like this. This is the swing of the arm. Okay, we see it in the swing of the arm when we walk. Lower hemisphere is the opposite. The leg moves front to back and then pulls down. And all of the tissue below our diaphragm should be pulling in this like beautiful circular motion. You see it in the swing of how you walk. The arms go back to front, the legs go front to back. And that polarity keeps us upright and but it also keeps our tissues in the right tone. So when you do this, everything, you should practice sitting in your chair, sitting at a light. What does it feel like to pull all of my guts down rather than up? Even if you pull them back, even if you're pulling your guts back into you, pull the energy and the resulting tension down because that's going to release the chronic upheld tension in your upper body. So that's upper body fix. Hands behind you, lift your chest, move your diaphragm. Lower body is you've got to stop tucking your freaking pelvis. You must have an arch in your low back, and we can go into why at a different time. Stop tucking, even if you think it's going to protect my back, or I've got to make sure that my back is flat when I do crunches or when I don't crunch because we don't work out, remember? Yeah. But you cannot tilt your pelvis and hope to have that strength. So what's nice about this, remember I just mentioned polarity. If you lift your chest, your pelvis should naturally start to arch more because they're complementary opposite structures in the body. Another thing that you can do to really help pelvic floor health is simply lift your toes off the ground. You're going to stand on your feet, all 3 foot centers. So you have your big toe, your little toe, and your heel. Make a tripod on the ground. And when you lift your toes, they are not supposed to be weight bearing on your feet. They're actually there just simply for balance and agility. So when you carry weight through your torso, if you lift your toes up, it'll shift your pelvis and your weight back into the right polarity line with your spine. You can do this while you're brushing your teeth, filling your car with gas. I'll come. Sorry.
It's all right.
Clip that out. My son just woke up from his nap. My mom was just telling me. I'm sorry. So if you can fix your pelvis, and what you could take this clip. Here's what this looks like. Most of us are like this. Can you see me? And I'm wearing black, sorry. Okay, we have this, and we have this, and our rims, okay? And then our shoulders are down. Well, imagine what's happening inside all your tissues that are like multidimensional, okay? So I want you to lift your ribs, you pull your hands behind, and you lift. That will naturally fix some of the pelvis problems. But then if I lift my toes, it actually pushes my pelvis back. It's not an arch. I'm not hyperextending my back. I just lift my toes. And then I try to practice animating the tissue. Now, let's talk about this. Animation is different than tightening. Muscles and fascia work seamlessly together. Muscles contract big power, and the fascia takes that power and distributes it and dilutes it so it's not sitting in one area. When you tighten your tummy, hold the tension and see if you can separate the feeling between tension in the muscle And then the fascia should feel almost like a rain bead, you know, those rainmaker sticks. It feels like actual energy circles down and empties through the tubes of your legs. And this is something that you will have to practice. If you are tight and rigid, your fascia has lost its animation. And so it's not something that you might just naturally feel. You have to try to look for it. And it feels like a soft melting. It feels like a distribution. Sometimes people will be like, it feels like there was just liquid down my legs or something. It's a sensation that you're looking for. It's good practice also for just collecting more sensation in general. So what I tell people is lift your ribs, untuck your pelvis, try to move your guts into a downward pull. This will help your digestion. This will help your metabolism. This will help your low back pain. And this will also help your pelvic floor health. And I can't even tell you how many women come to me postpartum and we do these very simple changes. They do it and layer it through your day. So here's the other thing. This has to be a way that you exist rather than only a practice. In the beginning, it has to be a mindful practice, but it will become a way. And the fastest way to make that possible is if you start to layer this in the Rolodex of your nervous system. I think I read somewhere a while ago that there is over 360 million processes being processed by your brain and your body every second. 365 million processes. Go ahead and take a big chunk of nervous system information, like I should untuck my pelvis, and try to layer that in once a day. It will never change. The nervous system doesn't work that way. And so what people need to do to make change is microdose. You need to do it while you're pulling off your sink in the morning and stretching, when you're brushing your teeth at night, when you're waiting for your kids outside their school and you use a chain link fence. You need to start being like, what does this feel like throughout my day, rather than set aside 5 minutes at the end, right before sex with my lover, to implement this. And this is really what this comes down to. I think it's a primary message that we share, which is living embodied, right? So much of what we do is living outside of the body, disembodied. But the body really is our sanctuary. It is our like sacred place of residence. And so it's a shame to jump out when there's pain. It's a shame to jump out when there's fear or when there's pleasure to be had, but we're fear of it. And it's like the first practice is coming in and being really present. And I don't know any better way than doing it with fascia sensations. What does this feel like? How does this feel? So those 3 things of healing in fascia for sexual pleasure, lifting your ribs, dropping your pelvis back, and letting your organs settle, those 3 things will definitely require you just being more embodied. What does it feel like to lift my chest? And 90% of the time people are like, oh my God, that feels so good. That feels so good. And I'm like, good. Now drop your pelvis. What does that feel like? Okay, that feels so good. And then they're getting the language of feeling. Then we're getting the presence of living in communion with our bodies, not at odds, right? Not jumping out, but jumping in deeper. And the truth is that's really how we connect to what's true for us and what's good for us, and knowing our true north is by reading our sensations and knowing what that means to us.
Yeah, so beautiful. I love the microdosing it multiple times throughout the day at just little moments, because that sort of feels a little bit more manageable as well. Like it takes slightly less discipline than like, all right, I'm going to sit down and do like a half hour stretch or workout or whatever.
That's right.
And it's just that regular, I guess, reminder, and it becomes a little bit more organic, I suppose, just to like be doing it without even thinking. So that's
I would
great.
like to just say one other thing. Can I just say one other thing? I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Because
I think that it's really important about this microdosing. Fascia is the feel-good body system. Okay, it is connected to your endorphin system, the way the muscles are connected to your adrenal system. And the reason I bring this up is because when you start doing these things that I just said, you're working more into the fascia aspect of body, not the muscle-based, adrenal-based, which changes the kind of tone you get everywhere and the blood flow that you get. But it's really about that microdosing is, in the beginning, it's a reminder, but pretty soon you're going to be choosing and chasing the good feeling. Fascia literally will give you that runner's high, this release, this like detoxifying, de-stressing whole body experience when you move this way. And that is something that you're addicted to, and that your brain starts to say, oh my gosh, I want to stretch like that. I'm going to do this movement because it feels good. And the more feel good sensations that you can collect, then the more natural it is to desire it, and the more easy it will be to microdose. It will become habit, because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm totally tight. I can feel it. You do. It's literally, so I don't know if people know this, but fascia has a reflex. It is just like your hunger reflex, your thirst reflex, and your sex drive reflex. And it goes to the same area of the brain that I was talking about in the very beginning. And so if you can stimulate through microdosing this feel-good sensation, you're literally starting and revving up that reflex that dogs have, that cats have, that are like, I got to stretch this out. I got to just move this out. And so that's really the key, is that if you have to keep it in your mind, it's always a chore.
Yeah.
But if you can actually chase the good feeling, which is kind of win-win, then I get to like collect the feelings that are going to lead towards pleasure, towards permission to have pleasure, towards the fear of not feeling pain, towards the antidote for pain. Feeling good is opposite to pain. And that's why pain and fascia are so interconnected, because fascia is saying, you have to help me deal with this congestion. I'm going to make you feel pain until you're listening. And then I open it and I find the fiber stretching and I release, and then the pain goes away. That was my story. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, because I think that twofold, chasing good feelings and also not having to remember, right? We want to hit the fascial reflex. So you're just naturally inclined towards lifting your chest, releasing your pelvis, letting your organs hang down in the guts. And that changes
Yeah, I love that, because habit forming is fucking hard, and having to find the motivation and remember to do the thing, so hard. And in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit of habit forming, but then ideally, if it turns into just this automatic thing that you do because it feels great and you just do it without even thinking, like, amazing. So that's definitely what we're aiming for. I have so many. I'm spewing because I have so many more questions I still didn't get a chance to ask you, so I'll definitely have to have you back on.
I would love that. That would be really fun.
But would you mind leaving us with a quick TMI story? That's another segment that I do where people just tell a story that might be considered a bit TMI usually, but is very welcome in this space. If you can think of something.
You're so cute.
TMI, we love it. Said TMI, we love it.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion, though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps, because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later.
TMI. I mean, I remember the time when I really found the pleasure in anal stimulation.
Right.
And being able to integrate that into like a holistic, like marriage type scenario for me. Mm-hmm. And also how much it actually opened my pelvic floor, which is so interesting because they share a common wall, right? Yeah. And so there was this sense of healing and opening that was coming from just giving myself permission. Can you hear him?
Yeah, I can.
I'm sorry.
As we're talking about butt stuff.
I know. He can't hear me. He's only 2 and he has no idea what we're talking about, but I know, buddy. I'm almost done. So anyway, I would say that maybe that's it. Like this really like one of my more freeing, because I think I was like every girl who just performed.
Yeah.
Right. And didn't really, and then men just didn't know how to meet my needs. And I actually didn't have a man who taught me presence until my husband, who was like, I'm super here with you. And I can tell that you're faking and that's not allowed. And I'm like, oh, really? Because I'm pretty sure that worked for me in the past. And he's like,
wow,
honey, we can't go deep this way. We can't go.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to just open up and share myself in that way and be like, oh, okay, these are points of healing for me. And I would say maybe that.
Amazing. Well, that was a perfect one because it also related to what we were talking about, but amazing. I'm gonna let you go and hang out with your Bob. And thank you so much for being so generous with your knowledge and your time. I'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes, and I'm definitely I gotta get you back on. I would love to get you to do a workshop in my online course too. Like this stuff. Oh my gosh,
I would love that. I would be honored. Yeah. I would be honored to collaborate because I think that what you're doing is really important.
Thank you.
For women all the way around the world. I do. I feel like I was raised where sexuality was sacred. It wasn't secret. It wasn't dirty, but it was only in the context of marriage.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of like self-care and how to, ask for things. And it was still in the basis of kind of this biblical, of, and that didn't meet my sexual appetite and that didn't, and so I was that Christian kid that like do everything except penetration. And then you're like, well, I think that's not really the point we're trying to get around. So I just think about a lot of different women's, and then I had my really bad sexual abuse from the time of 5. And so I think that just I think that what I'm coming back to is that I love the fact that my parents really instilled in me that there is this deep spirituality to sex. That it's not only animalistic and primal and essential and sensual, but that requires that you really go into who you are as a person and really dig into, like it's the closest you can be to someone. It is someone entering into you, entering your sacred spaces, which is why I think women struggle with it much more. There's many reasons, but I think that it's like, this is my temple. This is holy. This is sacred. And so you being helping people build, find, discover, restore, right? It's really a restoration of what sex should be for women. I think it's very different. My husband has been very helpful in me understanding. I used to think that sex was mutually, and in this day and age, people are just so sexually like, what you and what, like, I'm not this and I'm not, it's like, but there's a very clear distinction, and women, I think, suffer sometimes from not having it be like, this is what this can look like and stuff. So anyway, to that note, I think that what you're offering is really beautiful.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you bringing me on. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, babe. Awesome. Well, I'll definitely be in touch. And thank you so much for this chat. It's been awesome.
It's been really fun. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraf_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraf.com/freebies. Anyway, later labial legends. See you next time.